I've been teaching poetry writing workshops and discussion groups in the community now for 20 years with people of all ages. Students, grades K through 12, veterans, seniors, patients, and caregivers. And what I find most striking always is the quality of a kind of intimate conversation that the poems and the discussion of the poetry brings about. A conversation that gives us an opportunity to have with each other, with the world, and with ourselves. So I'm also struck by what happens over and over again is that aha moment, that moment of surprise when somebody makes a leap of thought, a new understanding. And that leap of thought is like a spark. Like you rub two sticks together, you can rub two words together in a new way. Words that might not normally be put side by side to make a new meaning, and you feel that spark. Emily Dickinson said famously that she knew she was in the presence of a poem when she felt the top of her head come off. Well, that's quite a spark. You know, I think that in our culture, despite all of our technology and our connectivity, we have actually a growing, deeper hunger for this intimate conversation. A conversation with each other and with ourselves. The Chinese-American poet Li Li says, poetry is the inner voice of one person speaking to the inner voice of another. And that intimacy can happen in a big crowd of 800 people and you're listening to a poem. Maybe you just felt it now. And you feel that thread of connection, of a conversation with that voice. That's what pulled me into poetry. I was hungering for my own intimate conversation and for my inner voice, to be listening and responding to the inner voice of others. Well, I too am a father. I know Sam shared his photos of his child, and I was walking home from school 2 years ago with my daughter Ella, who was 6 at the time. We're holding hands, we're walking home from Holden Elementary School, and all of a sudden, she just stopped. She squeezed my hand harder, and she goes, "Daddy." She looked around. Everything has a name. The clouds, a word for it. The clouds, the trees, the grass. Who came up with these names? Where did they come from? Well, that was her aha moment. And I was sharing it with her. I didn't have an answer for her question. Poems are not about answering, but about living the questions more deeply, living that sense of awe and wonder. And it made me remember and think about a 3rd grade student I had recently taught who wrote a poem about her tree in her front yard that she called her childhood friend. And she wrote, "Tree, you are a big temple for birds." And what is she doing? She's renaming the world around her. She's renaming this tree. She's giving a new name for it. And that name is a marker for that intimate connection, for that conversation that she's had. She's made it new again. So, Stanley Kunitz, who lived to be 100 years old, an American poet, wrote up until the day he died. And in his early 90s, he wrote, "He who has forgotten the child he was is already too old for poetry." So what is that saying? Poems and poetry and all creative expression offers us that opportunity to enter back into that conversation with the child we were, and with that youthful sense of play, of exploration, of experimentation with language. At the Wick Poetry Center, we now have an annual performance called Giving Voice, and our very own Hal Walker plays music in between the poems. And it's everybody from 8 years old to 88. 92, we had a 92-year-old senior read. And a friend of mine said the other 2 years ago after the performance, he said, "You know, David, I felt like I could hear the young voice inside the old people and the old voice inside the young in that performance tonight." So I want to tell you a story about my very first experience teaching poetry in the schools. And in some ways, perhaps 20 years ago, it was my best experience. It's been downhill ever since. But here it was in Akron, Ohio, at a school called St. Sebastian School, 5th grade. And I came into that classroom to read poems about living in Japan. And I talked to them about eating bowls of soba and eating these bowls of soba on the street corners in Tokyo, and how you could slurp your soba. And it was considered a great compliment to the chef as you stood in rows with other businessmen slurping their sobas. And though I couldn't speak Japanese, I was an excellent slurper. And eating my soba, I felt fluent in their language for that time being. And I also said I loved how you could order an egg dropped in the middle of your soba. And I first called it a skimi soba okudasai, soba and egg, and learned later that I was completely wrong. They didn't know what I was asking for, and I had to order a full moon soba. A full moon soba, I said to these fifth graders. What a beautiful expression to think of that image in that idiomatic phrase. And one fifth grader raised her hand very nonchalantly. Well, that's not surprising. In our country, we order our eggs sunny side up. And that was a little aha moment for me. I was shaking my ears and listening and thinking I was tone deaf all my life to my own language, to that beautiful phrase and expression, the image in my own idiomatic expression. So this is my poem which tells the story of that very first day, walking into this fifth grade classroom around this time of year in November in Akron, Ohio, called Reaching to a Sky of Soba. And I must say that actually I read my poem to a quiet chorus of slurping. They were so fascinated with that idea of slurping. I walked past winter boots lined up in rows. Through the door, Miss Brown's 10 o'clock 5A English. My first day teaching poetry in the schools, the students crowd around. They want to know how tall I am and if my hair is real. A stranger in the room, I stand near a small stool they call the author's chair. Snow falls outside beyond windows dressed with pilgrim hats and turkeys. Reading my poem, Eating Soba, I say poetry lets you talk to things you don't normally talk to, and here I'm talking to noodles, as though my bowl were a smiling friend. In Japan, you can slurp as loud as you want. The louder, the greater the compliment to the chef. The class practices slurping. One boy asks, "Could you say the sky is a bowl of soba?" I smile, yes. Then the sun is a raw egg floating in it. Another hand appears. Trees are chopsticks. Heads turn to look out the windows. And clouds of steam rising above. The students gasp and applaud. Planets are onions. The moon is a bump at the bottom of the bowl. Earthquakes break up the noodles. Their rumbling is slurping. Our mouths are black holes breathing it in. God is the chef. Meteors are coins we throw down to pay. Then the shy boy, looking at the floor, raises his hand. The universe is a giant bowl of soba. We keep eating and eating until the last explosion. When the universe ends, he says, our bowl is empty. The bell rings, their hands still reaching in the air. Well, after that poem and after that class, they filed out and the teacher was shocked. And she said, "David, you won't believe what just happened." I said, "I don't believe what just happened." "What? I don't know how that happened." You know, it's like the Big Bang in one period. A new cosmology was born. She said, no. The boy who raised his hand with that first question, "Could you say the sky is a bowl of soba?" had never raised his hand before in class. He had not spoken. He had not had a voice until this poem and this opportunity to play with language came and pulled out his voice and inspired him and made him want to participate. And that's what poems can do. And so at the Wick Poetry Center, we have a wonderful community arts project now in its 5th year called Traveling Stanzas. And Traveling Stanzas is a community mass transit poetry project where we take poems from the community, we give them to graphic design students at Kent State, and they make them into posters that travel in the RTA and trains and buses, the PARTA, and they've traveled in Akron Metro as well. And I love that word stanza, which comes from Italian, meaning actually literally a waiting room, a little waiting room. So I think of these traveling stanzas, these poems above the heads of busy, hurrying commuters, as little moments of pause, little pockets of time in our day to pause and have that intimate conversation, to pull a voice out of us and to engage in that conversation. So I'd like to play one of our videos. We've made animated videos out of these, and they're available on the website, travelingstanzas.com, and they can be sent as animated e-greetings to anybody in the world with a little message, to hear the original audio of the child or adult or veteran reading his or her poem. If that's not an idea we're spreading, I don't know what is. So go visit that site, and let's look at this poem, animated video called My Voice. It comes from Miller South School, 4th grade class. My Voice.
Oh, yeah. Did you hear about My voice. My voice fills the air with song. It pops out like a purple crocus in spring, blooming louder every day. My voice carries a secret and passes it on. Oh, yeah, did you hear about Bobby? What is Bobby? My voice is like an oven. It dings when a good idea is done. Ding!
My voice moves to the vibrations of peace. I hear the world sing, and
my voice sings back.
So in that video, I love that line, my voice is like an oven. It dings when a good idea is done. That sense of surprise, the Zen Japanese poets actually called aha-ness. And the ancient Chinese poets called it raising the head, that moment of surprise in a poem. And in the Wick Poetry Center, we've come up with a new name for that feeling. We call it a whomp. And we've defined it in our intern's office. A whomp is when a goosebump comes into contact with the Wick vibe. So if you've all felt a little tingling, that's a whomp. So I'd like to show you another animated video. This is by a senior at Judson Manor in Cleveland named Elvidio Buffalini, who wrote this poem in '88. He's a World War II veteran, and he told me once that writing poems for him, and he came to it very late in his life, in his late 80s, was a way of discovering how remarkable his experiences have been and how they fit together. And he said, every poem is a new hatching. I love that phrase, the idea of a poem as a new hatching. This is a poem inspired by a poem by Georgia Ella Lyon called Where I'm From. Where I'm From.
Where I'm from, I dare say I'm from a cherished memory and the immediacy of an intimate moment, harking back to the heart's thirsty infancy. Me at the time, a compliant toddler, sitting content on Grandpa's knee, held close in a warm embrace. Grandpa's soft white beard caresses my quickened face. The imprinted glow and flow of his full-grown male affection, mothering and fathering me, perhaps in a subtle way, through the alchemy of fellow feeling, nurturing into being this now concluding, love-blessed life of an aging man.
There's Elvidio talking to the child he was and being in that kind of intimate conversation. So what else can we do with these traveling stanzas? Well, we are now in the process of building in Kent an interactive poetry park on the new KSU Esplanade that links the town and the gown. And in this poetry park, we'll have display holders for changeable exhibits of these posters, of these traveling stanzas. And using this digital technology, you'll be able to hold up a smartphone or a tablet to each poster and hear the voice of the child or adult or veteran reading his or her poem as you walk around the park and engage with it. And there'll be an amphitheater there for outdoor classes as well. And it'll be linked to our new home, which will be in the May Prentice House on the Esplanade. So I like to think, and we have an app now, the Wick Poetry Center app, free and downloadable, that has all of these animations as well as lesson plans. So I like to think that we're using the newest technology to remind us of and connect us to the oldest technology, which is our voice, which is language, and the ability to write it down. One final little story I want to tell about renaming the world. It comes from Lima, Ohio. I was doing a residency in a second grade class, and all year long I kept coming back for a week at a time. And not until springtime did this one second grade girl find a voice and actually finish and write a poem and read it to the class. We were making up new words for spring and putting them all on the chalkboard. And then drawing lines and arrows as though we were creating some complicated play for a football game. And making new combinations, seeing how words felt when we rubbed them together in new ways. And this girl, Kathy, wrote, I'm going tulip crazy in this lilac city. Dandelion faces smiling all around me. I'm going daisy crazy in this mud-delicious world. And that was like, again, a breakthrough for her. And it took time. It took time. It was like the end of the year. But she found a voice, and her mother would come up to me in town and say, what happened? What happened? Kathy's writing poems at home. She's talking about poetry. She's engaged. She's excited. So I like to think that poetry gives us that ability to tap into what is forever young in us, that youthful sense of play, of exuberance, of experimentation, and to feel the mud-delicious language that we are gifted with and the mud-delicious world we live in. You know, if we keep up that conversation with ourselves and with the child and that youthful sense of play in ourselves, we can make our world anew. By naming our world anew, by renaming, we renew our relationship to ourselves and to each other and our world. And we will never be too old for poetry. Thank you.